On the 80th anniversary of the liberation of Auschwitz comes an unprecedented exhibition about one of history's darkest moments. Auschwitz, not long ago, not far away, features more than 500 original objects, first-hand accounts, and survivor testimonies that tell the powerful story of the Auschwitz concentration camp, its history and legacy, and the underlying conditions that allowed the Holocaust to happen. On now exclusively at ROM. Tickets at rom.ca.
Ask for unanimous consent to adopt the following motion. That notwithstanding any standing order, special order, or usual...
That's the sound of Karina Gould, then leader of the government in the House of Commons, from mid-September of 2023, during the fiasco when it was discovered that parliamentarians, including her, gave a standing ovation to that elderly Ukrainian-Canadian veteran who was a guest during President Vladimir Zelensky's visit to Canada. And as it turned out, the veteran had actually been a member of the Nazi Waffen-SS unit during the Second World War. So the Speaker of the House who invited him resigned, Trudeau apologized, and Karina Gould went one step further and tried to get the whole episode erased from the text of the official Hansard record. It didn't work. She couldn't get unanimous consent. The Conservatives slammed her, saying she should be ashamed because she's the granddaughter of Holocaust survivors who came to Canada in 1947. But Gould has never been ashamed of her Jewish heritage. Quite the opposite. Her grandfather survived Auschwitz. Her father is Jewish. Her parents met at a kibbutz. Gould went to synagogue growing up. She's been on Birthright. She marks Jewish holidays. And yet, as one of the 5 remaining candidates for the next leader of the Federal Liberal Party on March 9th, and then Prime Minister, Gould is also aware that as she campaigns to replace Justin Trudeau, who she supported for a decade since she was first elected in 2015, it's not just Canadians in general who she says have lost faith in the Liberal Party, but Canada's Jewish community too, due to her government's stance on Israel since October 7th.
For me, it's important that the Liberal Party is a home for Jewish Canadians. And, I have always, one of the things that I've always loved about being a Liberal is that we're a big tent party and we have people from every background, every race, every region of this country, every religion.
I'm Ellen Besner, and this is what Jewish Canada sounds like for Monday, February 10th, 2025. Welcome to the CJN Daily, a podcast of the Canadian Jewish News and made possible in part thanks to the generous support of the Ira Gluskin and Maxine Granovsky-Gluskin Charitable Foundation.
My name is Karina Gould, and I'm running to be the next leader of the Liberal Party of Canada!
Since Karina Gould launched her leadership campaign 3 weeks ago, she's been dropping new announcements on her priorities. Ottawa should help new home buyers with 50% of the cost of their mortgages. There should be more homes and affordable homes for the homeless. She'd cut the GST and tax big corporations. And she thinks the Liberal Party forcing leadership candidates to pay $350,000 to qualify is ridiculous, although her team did scramble and managed last week to raise the required funds to continue on. But Gould also spent the weekend publicly demonstrating her stand on issues of importance to the Canadian Jewish community. She chatted about the Middle East with Irwin Cotler, former Liberal Justice Minister and former Special Envoy on Anti-Semitism and Holocaust Remembrance. She calls him her friend and mentor. And she'd met with Cotler in person the week after she launched her campaign on January 25th, just hours after Cotler met the perceived frontrunner, Mark Carney. Also this weekend, after the release of the 3 emaciated Israeli hostages on Saturday, Gould demanded the immediate and unconditional release of the rest of them, including the remains of Canadian Judith Weinstein-Haggai, although she didn't mention the word Hamas anywhere in her social media post. And Gould's definitely a hard no on U.S. President Donald Trump's idea to move the Palestinians out of Gaza and rebuild it. If Gould wins, she would make history as the first person of Jewish heritage to be Canadian Liberal leader and Prime Minister. She joined me from her home in Burlington. Welcome to the CJN Daily.
Thanks for having me.
What can you tell us about continuing on with the deadlines for fundraising? How are you guys doing?
We're doing really well. So I will be continuing on, but the party has set the fundraising goals very, very high, but we're going to meet them for Friday, and we're going to keep on trucking to meet them for the next Friday as well.
And do you want to talk to us a bit how you are able to meet those financial goals in terms of where the money's coming from?
So look, it's been incredible. It's been coming from thousands of people across the country who are making a bunch of small donations. So my average donation is less than $200. And that is really exciting. It's people who are believing in my vision and my leadership and are excited about the opportunity that I represent for the country. So smaller donations, and this is a people-powered campaign.
We do, of course, this is the Canadian Jewish News, and we're not only one or two issue focused, but because you are the only Jewish candidate in the constellation, of course, our listeners would like to get to know you better. As a Liberal candidate who's been in cabinet for a long time, I'm sure that you are aware that the continuing position of the Liberal Trudeau government since October 7th has really infuriated many people in the Canadian Jewish community. How do you respond to this? First of all, you're aware of how angry they are about UNRWA, about all the issues, arms embargoes, you name it. He hasn't gone to Israel since October 7th. And the anti-Semitism.
Yeah, no, of course. I mean, I'm in touch with the community and have spoken to many people about their feelings of frustration and anger, but more than anything, actually, their fear here in Canada with the rise of anti-Semitism and how that's making people feel in our own country. And that's one of the things that I've just talked to a lot of people about and heard from.
As somebody who was in charge of UNRWA and now you're trying to become the next prime minister, do you regret continuing to fund UNRWA in light of the intelligence and the information that's come out about their participation in October 7th, the holding of the hostages, and the anti-Semitic Jew hate in their educational materials?
Well, so I mean, I would just like to clarify, like it's not UNRWA, the organization that participated. There were people who worked for UNRWA, and what the government of Canada and governments across the world did was suspend that funding while that investigation was going on. Look, in the Palestinian territories, there needs to be education and healthcare provided. And at the moment, UNRWA was one of the only organizations that was doing that. I think, as we have this ceasefire now, as we are looking towards what hopefully a peaceful resolution looks like, there needs to be conversations about who is best placed to provide healthcare, education, services to Palestinians. My position has always been and will always been that we need a two-state solution. And so we need to ensure that there are opportunities for Palestinians to live in peace and security as there are for Israelis to live in peace and security. And ensuring that those basic services are provided is something that's essential.
So UNRWA should continue to be the person, the people on the ground. Is that what you're saying? As leader, you will continue to fund UNRWA?
I would. In the interim, there isn't another alternative. But that being said, there needs to be a very clear direction, obviously, that there can be no connection with Hamas and there can be no support for Hamas. And in a two-state solution, in a future government in Palestinian territories, there can be no role for Hamas whatsoever. And that is very clear from my position, and I think from Canada as well.
What do you say? I've read it on Twitter, but perhaps it'd be a good opportunity for you to talk here on our show about the Donald Trump position to temporarily remove Palestinians, build it as a Riviera, clean it up, maybe move them out permanently.
Sure. I mean, look, that's an unacceptable position. And I think we all have to be honest about the fact that even suggesting that puts Israel and Israelis in more insecurity. I mean, we've seen the reaction from neighbors in the region, from Arab countries, that they're threatening to say, like, this is something that would harm their peace agreements with Israel. So this is not something that is constructive and that is going to lead to peace or security for anybody in the Middle East. Right now, we all need to be focused on this ceasefire and working towards peace, because there's been far too much suffering for people in the region. And, making sure that Israelis and Palestinians can both live in peace and security has to be our number one focus.
What about the arms exports embargo? As leader, would you change that to Israel?
Yeah. Well, look, I think there are two things here. One is when it comes to Israel's ability to defend itself. When rockets were being rained down on Israel from Iran, obviously Israel needs to have the ability to defend itself. When it comes to offensive responses, I think those need to be assessed on a case-by-case basis. We cannot deny that the suffering in Gaza was immense. I mean, that the fact of the matter is there was a humanitarian crisis, and by no means am I suggesting that this wasn't a result of what Hamas did on October 7th, which was absolutely evil and terrible and horrific. But the situation in Gaza is something that we have to ensure that there is that humanitarian assistance. And so we need to be able to find the balance as to Israel's ability to defend itself from attack, but then also recognize that its humanitarian suffering in Gaza was extraordinary.
So yes, that you would remove the embargo, or because you said it depends.
It depends on what kinds of arms we're talking about, and if those are defensive arms or whether those are offensive arms.
Understood. So how would you differentiate? So you would say that you would revisit it as leader, you would revisit this blanket arms embargo?
Yeah, I think it's a case by case situation to ensure that Israelis have the ability to defend themselves from attack, and then understand what that offensive weaponry and how it's being used.
All right, we'll move on because in the interest of time, I appreciate that. On what's been happening in terms of the caucus and the divisions in caucus in the M and the Liberal Party, because of what's happened in October 7th, you've had a front row seat. Could you tell us what it was like for you when, for example, March 18th, when the government was considering an NDP motion? I mean, you were off on mat leave, but you were still able to vote, right? On unilaterally declaring a Palestinian state. What did you want to happen out of that March 18th vote, which was a watershed for support for the party?
Yeah, well, look, like one of the things that I've always loved about being a Liberal is that we're a big tent party, and we have people from every background, every race, every region of this country, every religion. And that has to continue, I think, in order for us to truly represent Canadians. I've been very clear about what my position is. It is a two-state solution. Eventually, that includes the recognition of a Palestinian state, but you can only do that within a two-state solution that is negotiated between two peoples. And so that is something that I am very clear on, and that is something that I want to continue to work towards.
I noticed that on October 7th, from your social media account, you lit a yellow memorial yard-side candle. I think you could see Parliament Peace Tower from your balcony. I think I don't know where that was, and that seemed very important to you. Can you remember what you were thinking of when you did that gesture back in October 7th of this year?
Yeah, I mean, I was thinking about the horrors that happened on October 7th, and I was thinking about the people who were murdered, the people who were horrifically kidnapped, and the absolutely terrible occurrence that happened. And so I think it's important to remember that and to hold that space for all of us. I mean, it was an absolutely horrific day. I was recalling waking up on October 7th, a year and a half ago, like so many people, to this absolutely horrific news that was happening, and thinking about the innocent people who were just going about their day-to-day lives, and who were attacked and killed and maimed. And it's a terrible feeling to have. So just remembering that was important for me, and also thinking about the hostages, and hoping that we would get to where we are today, where they're being returned home. But that's a long time to be kept hostage.
The Prime Minister did not go to Israel since October 7th, and you're aware, one of the only G7 not to go. Did you ever convince him or try to convince him that this wasn't a good thing and he should go?
I know that the foreign minister went on a number of occasions, and we had many conversations about this. I'm not sure that I had a specific conversation with him about this.
On the 80th anniversary of the liberation of Auschwitz comes an unprecedented exhibition about one of history's darkest moments. Auschwitz, not long ago, not far away, features more than 500 original objects, first-hand accounts, and survivor testimonies that tell the powerful story of the Auschwitz concentration camp, its history and legacy, and the underlying conditions that allowed the Holocaust to happen. On now exclusively at ROM. Tickets at rom.ca.
Speaking of the Prime Minister, you're trying to become the new leader and maybe try to break away from the 9 years of Liberal leadership. How are you finding you're able to share that deviation or that new road and what's going to happen in the future?
Like, there's a lot that we did over the last 9 years that was good for Canada and for Canadians. So I'm not going to run away from our record on childcare. I'm not going to run away from the Canada Child Benefit. I'm not going to run away from, the investments that we've made in the economy. But I do think there are, moments and times where we didn't get things quite right, and where it's important for us as Liberals to recognize that when Canadians were saying to us, hey, we're trying to tell you that we disagree with this policy, or we disagree with the way this is being rolled out, we weren't really able to pivot and to change course. And so when I think about, a particular moment that this happened for Canadians, I think about the end of the pandemic when, we had done a really good job managing through COVID. If you compare us to peer countries, Canada's results were a lot better, even though it was a very difficult and hard time for Canadians. But at the end of the pandemic, when inflation was going out of control and Canadians were saying, like, help, we can't afford things, like, this is really too much. We didn't really listen at that time. Like, eventually we got there, but it took a number of months for us as a government to, like, really hear where Canadians were. And so for me, I think it's important to be able to acknowledge those moments where we didn't get things right, and to acknowledge that we have to re-earn the trust of Canadians.
So how have you been trying to show that in your particular campaign?
So for me, it's really been about demonstrating that when it comes to the cost of living, I hear Canadians. The first number of announcements that I've made have been about making life more affordable. I announced that, for a year, I would reduce the GST from 5% to 4%. This is something that is important, particularly for lower or moderate income Canadians who will see the price difference immediately at the till. And, it's a savings of almost $700 a year for people that makes a big difference, right? The second thing I announced was that I would increase corporate taxes on the richest companies. So companies that earn over $500 million a year in profit from 15 to 17%. A company like Loblaws, at the time of inflation, they were doing shrinkflation. They were making their products more expensive for Canadians. So I think they can, pay more in taxes to support Canadians as well. And then the third thing that I announced was that we need greater competition in this country. We need to have a better competition bureau. We've made changes as a government, but I think we need to go further. That means our small and medium-sized businesses are going to be able to better compete. And it also means that Canadians will have more choices at across the consumer market at better prices. And today I made a big announcement on housing.
Our listeners may, of course, know this. With you in cabinet as the elder statesperson Jewish woman in cabinet, then Yara Sachs came in, and now Rachel Ben-Dayan. There are 3 Jewish women in cabinet. I don't know in history if that's ever happened before. Are you all aware of this? And do you ever talk about this?
Yeah, we do. It has definitely never happened before in Canadian history. And I think diversity is a good thing. It's a good thing to have people with diverse backgrounds in cabinet. And I think it's something that we're very proud of. And, the Liberal Party of Canada has the largest Jewish caucus in Canadian history, right? So that's also a good thing.
I read that you don't consider yourself a Zionist. Is that not correct?
Correct. I am. Like, I absolutely believe in Israel's right to exist and it being the homeland for Jewish people. So I am.
Saying that, so I will continue with this thought. Saying that you are a Zionist could open a whole bunch of problems for a leadership candidate.
Yeah.
And I wonder how you navigate that.
Well, I think it's important to have an honest conversation about what it means to be a Zionist. I think one of the things that has been really hard for me and for many Jewish Canadians is how people have decided what they think being a Zionist is, as opposed to what it really means. And one of the things that I've been, very alarmed about over the past 15 months in Canada is how Jewish Canadians have been targeted and held accountable for the actions of a state that is not Canada. And, one of the things that I have been very clear about with pretty much everybody is that you're a Jewish Canadian, but you're a Canadian, right? Like that is your identity. And even if you are a Zionist or, have close relations with Israel, we don't hold other people who have those same kind of relations with other countries to the same level or ascribe ideas and values to them based on the actions of those countries. And that is something that is not correct and it is wrong. And, I think that we have to have an honest conversation about that. And, we talked about earlier how Jewish Canadians are feeling. And, I was in Toronto yesterday and went by a Jewish community center that has police stationed outside of it. And like everybody in this country, no matter your religion, no matter your background, should feel safe to be who you are. That is one of the hallmarks of being Canadian. And I think, it's very concerning to see the level of anti-Semitism that we have in this country, and we have to fight back against it.
Have you lately or before experienced personal attacks because you've been proud about your Jewish heritage?
Yeah, I mean, I unfortunately have to have extra security for a whole host of reasons. But that's something that I just find in general kind of sad about the state of our politics is that there, like when I entered politics a decade ago, we just didn't have this level of insecurity in general, and we didn't have these level of polarization.
People are going to remember this picture of you with Yaroslav Hunka, the Ukrainian gentleman who got the standing ovation. Will you, as leader, commit to releasing the 900 names that is on the Duchenne report, which so many people in the community have been focusing on, and the government said no, and there's appeals of it? What's your position on that? Clarity of transparency of a Canadian record, historical record on whether they admitted Nazi war criminals or not.
Yeah. So let me just address that photo because I mean, that is one of the worst moments in Canadian parliamentary history. And unfortunately, when I took that photo, I didn't know who he was or what he represented. And, we take photos with a lot of people. And of course, when the Speaker of the House recognizes somebody, you assume that they've done their due diligence. But what an absolutely embarrassing moment for us as Canada, to be honest. With regards to the Duchenne report, I think we have to be clear on whether these are people who have actually been identified as Nazis or whether they were simply investigated, because there are people in that report who were under investigation but were never confirmed to have actually been Nazis or not. And so to release names of people who might have been under investigation but not convicted, or not have found to have been, involved in those activities, I have concerns about. But if there are names of people in that report who were confirmed to have participated in these kinds of activities, then absolutely those names should be released. Obviously, I haven't seen the contents of the report, so I don't know enough about it. But my grandparents are Holocaust survivors. And so, anybody who was involved in the Nazi war crimes, I think should absolutely be held accountable.
I don't know whether you would like to explain to our listeners who maybe don't know, they haven't read in the press, in terms of your background?
My grandparents immigrated here after World War II. As I said, my grandfather was a Holocaust survivor. My grandmother escaped to England during the war, and they reconnected afterwards. They were high school sweethearts, and were able to reconnect.
From what country were they from?
From Czechoslovakia.
What city or town they were from?
Žatec, about an hour, I guess, west of Prague, and in the Sudetenlands. So it was one of the first areas where the Nazis came in, unfortunately. And but they have a beautiful story about how they were able to reconnect following the war. And they immigrated to Canada. My grandfather's uncle sponsored them. He was a peach farmer in Niagara. And so they arrived in Montreal with $5 in their pocket and made it to Niagara, where my grandfather worked in a grocery store and my grandmother, worked, I think, in a cafe. And then eventually they bought an apple farm in Linden, Ontario, and became apple farmers. I never met my grandfather. He died early from health problems. But my grandmother got to live to see her granddaughter elected to Parliament and to become a cabinet minister. And she was always so grateful for Canada for offering our family safe haven and opportunity. And that's something that she always instilled in me. So I often think about my grandmother and, how her life changed, but how proud she was to be Canadian and how grateful she was for this country.
And I know that your dad is the Jewish side of the family, and they had a wonderful story about meeting at Kibbutz Naot, which I've been to and bought a lot of shoes at their
Yeah.
as one does. Was there stigma at that time of your dad being the son of a Holocaust survivor, navigating marrying somebody who wasn't Jewish, who was German? How did that go over in the family?
Yeah, so my parents did meet in Israel. They met on Kibbutz Nayat. I got to go there as well, and I did buy some sandals. I still have them. They're great. They're really good quality. Yes, there was stigma. My grandmother was not happy about it at all. But my great grandfather, who her father was very happy about it because he always identified as an Austrian, and so he would quote like Schiller and Goethe to my mom, so he, really connected with her, even if she was German, but
Kohn is not such a German name. Kohn could be Cohen. It also could
well,
be. We don't know.
Exactly. Yeah, exactly. So it absolutely could have been at some point. But my mom actually spoke Hebrew because she lived in Israel for a year. So she, loved everything about Jewish culture.
It's none of my business, and you can tell me no, but are you raising your kids Jewish? Are there going to be bar mitzvahs and baby namings and brisses and all that stuff?
Well, I grew up kind of more in the traditions, and we would go to synagogue, particularly for Yahrzeit, and we always celebrate the holidays, and I'm going to do that with my kids as well, and I do that with my children. My son, being the son of a politician, said to me, okay, so let me just get this straight. We celebrate Thanksgiving, Halloween, Diwali, Christmas, and Hanukkah. Right? So,
And you said yes.
and I said, yes, we do. Right? So it's, I'm very proud of my Jewish heritage. It's something that I hold very dear, and it's absolutely something that I'm passing on to my children.
You don't speak Hebrew, do you? Do you speak Hebrew?
Oh, no.
Okay. And finally, everybody's thinking about Donald Trump, trade tariffs. Have you met him personally at all? Ever? And so you have not. How would you be able to deal with him as leader and prime minister to help save Canada?
Yeah, well, Canada will never be the 51st state. We are uniquely Canadian, and one of the things that I've been really proud of over the past couple of days in particular is seeing how Canadians have come together as Canadian and really, had this sense of patriotism and pride in our country, something that, I think should make all of us feel good, right? Um, Look, I've been dealing with bullies in the House of Commons for the last 10 years, so I know how to stand up for Canada and I know how to stand up for Canadians. I also know how to negotiate with people with whom I don't necessarily see eye to eye. I negotiated the childcare agreements across the country, many of whom were conservative governments at the time. But I also know how to work with people. So even if they don't necessarily share my set of beliefs and values, I know how to stand up for what we need and what we care about in Canada, but also how to find common ground and work together.
When you say bullies, are you talking about specific parties or people specifically?
Yeah, well, I would say particularly the opposition party and Pierre Poilievre in the House of Commons. So I know how to stand up for Canada and stand up for Canadians.
Listen, it's been a great honor to chat with you and get to know you. Good luck.
Thank you for having me. I appreciate it.
And that's what Jewish Canada sounds like for this episode of the CJN Daily. Brought to you in part thanks to the generous support of the Ira Gluskin and Maxine Granovsky-Gluskin Charitable Foundation. Karina Gould speaks several languages, including Spanish, which she learned while volunteering in an orphanage in Mexico, where she met the man who would later become her husband. She has a degree from McGill, and she got another one from Oxford University. She parlayed her knowledge of Latin America to work in the U.S. Capitol and later for the Mexican Embassy in Toronto before she entered politics at the age of 28. A little more about her Jewish roots. She has 3 younger brothers, Aaron, Jonah, and Noah. Our show is produced by Zachary Judah Kaufman. Our executive producer is Michael Freeman, and our music is by Dov Beck-Levine. Thanks for listening.
On the 80th anniversary of the liberation of Auschwitz comes an unprecedented exhibition about one of history's darkest moments. Auschwitz, Not Long Ago, Not Far Away, features more than 500 original objects, first-hand accounts, and survivor testimonies that tell the powerful story of the Auschwitz concentration camp, its history and legacy, and the underlying conditions that allowed the Holocaust to happen. On now exclusively at ROM. Tickets at rom.ca.